This talk tonight is about something that I have not talked about expressly or specifically for a couple of months. So this is the time. It's one of my favorite topics of conversation, is all about habits. And the reason I thought about giving this talk tonight is because we have, as you know, I talk a lot about the challenges and the questions of the week in the dojo. But we have two challenges of the week in the dojo that are around daily action. And a lot of them have the same kind of pattern because it is just a very effective, efficient way to create habits. So when we do the physical challenge of the week, for example, this week's challenge is to do 1 minute of core strengthening every single day. And if you do that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, then you did it. You did the whole challenge. 7 minutes. That's it. Yet there are still some of you who hear the challenge and think, oh, I have to do it every day. Are you serious? It's 1 minute. And I know that for some people, doing a solid minute of ab work or core strengthening is difficult. So you can do it, split it up however you need to. You can do it for 10 seconds at a time. But this idea of doing something every day is so valuable. I'll talk about the idea of doing something for even 1 minute and how powerful that is. But the internal challenge of the week is to journal every day. You can journal every day for a minute. You can journal every day for an hour, whatever you want. You can write 10 pages. You can write 1 page. You can write 1 sentence. But it's the act of getting out your journal, putting pen to paper or pencil to paper, or even just writing whatever you want. And you want to be able to get two things out of this. As martial artists, we are all about efficiency. We're all about getting the most bang for our buck, right? So you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone, to throw another analogy at you. We are doing both being able to journal and getting out whatever we need to get out, thinking about things that we need to think about, or in the case of the core strengthening, getting the physical strength from that. And that is one benefit, but the added benefit is the work on creating habits. And our goal is to become all powerful in our own lives to the extent that it is possible. And people have a tendency to view their habits or experience their life like they are at the whim of their experiences. They are the whim of the people around them. This is what the question of the week is getting to in the dojo this week. Do I make my own decisions, or do other people make my decisions for me? If you have a tendency to think like this habit is just who I am, it just happened to me. I don't know how it happened, but there's nothing I can do about it now. It's me. It's my habit. You are wrong, and you should fix your attitude, because you get to decide the habits that you have and the person that you are. If not you, who's deciding that? And of course, we can get into the deeper level of this conversation and talk about free will versus determinism, and however you want to think about that is fine. I want to talk tonight about the practical nature of forming habits, how that works, and to inspire you to decide what habits you want to form, and then to take the actions. When? Today, tonight. As soon as you get off this talk, and maybe your habit is, I'm going to start meditating. Okay, then that's it. If it's not a meditation habit, then meditate first, and then do the thing that you need to do to form your habits. But I want to talk about the importance of daily action. So this has kind of it's like the principle of compounding interest, where you do something and it has an effect, right? And then you do something, you do it again, and it is building on top of what you did the first day. It's not like I start from 0 and I go to 10, and then I put it away, and the next day I start from 0 and I go to 10. If you're getting daily action with a lot of these habits, it's going to have the feeling of, I'm going from 0 to 10 one day, and then I'm going from 10 to 20 the next day, and then I'm going from 20 to 30 the next day. And that's not actually compounding interest works, but I'm not an economist. Just get the idea that the more consistency you have with this stuff, the better. So this is such an important concept that it's one of the 5 ways of becoming great at martial arts. It's actually the second out of the 5 ways. The first is to become patient. If you want to get great at martial arts, you have to be patient. I was just talking about this with a student 5 minutes ago, because it's going to take us much longer than we want it to take. And if you are obsessed with getting it quickly, it's not going to happen. So you got to be patient with yourself, be patient with the whole process, because it is a process. The second way is to persevere. And perseverance on some level is about the consistency and not letting there be too much time in between your practices. So if you are learning a punch, for example, and you do it one day, and then you come back the next day and you do the same punch again, maybe in a different drill, maybe in a different combination, but you're doing the same punch, you are building on top of what you learned before. Versus, I do one punch and then I don't do it again for weeks. I do it again, I'm kind of like, I think I remember this, but you're essentially starting over from zero, right? So we want to use that same principle in our lives as we are forming habits, because it is a massively different experience, a much more powerful way of creating the kind of habits and the kind of daily existence that we want, rather than getting that feeling of always starting over and always like, this is such a chore, it's so difficult for me to do. I'm learning Cantonese right now. One of the students yesterday asked me, why Cantonese? Because I want to put off learning how to count correctly in Mandarin for as long as possible. I don't want to know how poorly I've been counting in Mandarin this entire time. But seriously, my fiance is from Hong Kong. Her family speaks Cantonese, and she warned me that if you don't learn Cantonese when we go to Hong Kong to visit my family, they will all talk trash about you behind your back. So you're going to have to learn what they're saying so that you can talk it back to them. And I love learning languages. I'm not great at it, but I do it. So I'm using the Pimsleur program. If you guys have never done Pimsleur, I don't know if it's the absolute best, but it's definitely one of the best methods of learning language. It's just a book on tape. You listen to a half-an-hour lesson every single day. And the brilliance about this is that it is exactly what I'm describing now. You learn a couple of words, you learn a couple of concepts, and then the next day, you learn a little bit more, but you're still reviewing all the stuff that you did the first time. So instead of learning this and then put that aside and come back to it a week later, you're doing it the very next day. And then you're learning the very next day, and you're just building on top of what you did. And every day you're going back and getting that repetition that is so necessary. And my experience of the first couple of lessons was, I have no idea what is happening. I literally cannot hear the difference in tones. I don't know the difference between any of the words that they're saying. And I thought that I was getting myself to sound something like correct Cantonese until I got lots of very helpful feedback from my Cantonese speaking friends and family to be. And they had to correct me many, many times. And with that daily practice, the next day I felt like 10% better. And then the next lesson I felt a little bit better. And then after a couple of lessons, 3, 4, 5, I look back and I realized that I am nowhere near being able to have any kind of conversation in Cantonese, but I actually kind of have a hint of understand what's going on, understanding what's happening in this conversation, and being able to speak it to some, less embarrassing degree. And it is all about that repetition and the daily repetition. Now, I'm going to be totally honest with all of you, because this is just who I am. It's been a couple of days since I did the last lesson. I had a good run a couple of days in a row, and then, life happens. And so I know what's going to happen is I'm going to have to go back and review a couple of those lessons. And it might take an experience like that to help you understand the real value and necessity of daily practice because you feel those setbacks. If you've experienced how smoothly and powerfully it works to have daily action, then those setbacks are going to be very obvious. So daily action, why daily? We have a tendency to experience our life in these chunks of time. And, we experience moments, we experience hours, we experience days, weeks, months, years. And when we look back on these chunks of time, we can look at what we've accomplished. We can look at the things that we've done and the memories that we have and all of that stuff. I think, and I have no actual scientific proof or studies to back this up, but my experience at least is that the chunk of time that we have a tendency to pay attention to the most and to kind of delineate things by is the day. So from the time I woke up to the time I went to sleep, what happened? What did I get done? What did I experience, right? And of course, during that day, we're thinking about what we've done over the last weeks or months or years and all that stuff. But I think that the time that we have a tendency to view life by the most often and to experience life by is the daily chunk. So if you are doing something every day, now your experience of that thing is that that's something that I do. If you do something every other day, your experience of that thing is that's something that I sometimes do. If you do something once a week, your experience of that thing is I do that once a week. I don't do that often. But if you're doing something daily, that really gets under your skin and into your flesh and into your bones. It is really something that you do. It is something who you are becoming. And this is incredibly important in the beginning stages of habit forming because you've got to keep yourself motivated and you've got to allow yourself to feel the successes that you are having. So thinking of this thing as being a part of you, as a thing that you do, is incredibly important in the beginning stages. When you're starting a martial arts practice or anything else that is really complex and is going to be a real undertaking, getting into that mindset and deciding that this is who I am, this is what I do, and it's just a part of me. If you can get to that point early on, that's like half of the battle or more. You've just won so much of the battle because you convinced yourself that this is just who you are, right? Nobody here has to have there's no dilemma at night. It's like, should I brush my teeth or not? You just brush your teeth. It's what you've been doing for long enough that it is just a part of who you are. I'm just the kind of person who brushes my teeth. And we want all of the great habits in our lives that we are choosing to have that same kind of place in our hearts. We want it to have we want to experience them in the same ways as brushing our teeth. It's just those things that are so natural for us. So daily practice. Now, a lot of people in the beginning have a tendency to think of these daily habits or just any kind of habit forming as being something that is just too difficult, right? You take meditation, for example, and people think, what am I going to, I'm going to meditate every day for a half an hour or an hour? That's crazy. I can't do that. They give up before they even begin, right? And then you hear me say, you can do it for 10 minutes or you can do it for 20 minutes. And you think, okay, I think I can handle that. And then you do it for 10 minutes. And after the first meditation, if it's your first one, you think, oh, that was so hard. I'm supposed to do that every day. Or maybe the first one was great. And the next one was like, that was so hard. I'm supposed to do that every day. If you are struggling with that, then take the Kaizen principle. And some of you guys have heard this before, and maybe you haven't heard it called this way, but this is the Japanese principle of just doing something every day for a tiny amount of time. The amount of time they suggest is 1 minute. So Kaizen, I'm doing this for 1 minute, and maybe it's the ab work that we talked about, the core strengthening. You can do that for 1 minute. You can get yourself to do almost anything for 1 minute every single day. You can certainly get yourself to meditate every day for 1 minute. If you can remind yourself to do it, I don't want to get too cocky about this, but I'm almost positive for every single person out there, all of you listening and all of your friends and all of your enemies and everybody, you can get yourself to sit still and breathe for 1 minute a day. And then what does that get you? Well, it doesn't get you very far with meditation, but it gets you very far in the habit forming part of the practice, which is, as I just said, such an important battle in the beginning. So once you're doing it daily, then you start working on adding length to your meditation, right? And you do it for 1 minute, however many days you need to do it for, before you start adding time. And then once you've got that consistency, then you've got length in your meditation. Then you start getting deeper with your meditation. But you can't skip ahead and think like, I'm going to sit and it's going to be the best meditation and I'm going to become enlightened right now. And then, oh, it didn't happen, forget this stuff. No, it is going to be a process. And that process is something that we must fall in love with. There's a great part of Zen and the Martial Arts, which if you haven't read this book, you absolutely need to. It's a spectacular book. It's 130 pages long, 133 pages, sorry, 134 pages. So all of you guys can do this. It's going to take you like 3 hours to read it. I promise you can handle this. But there is one of the chapters that I don't talk about that often. It's called Process, Not Product. I talk about this concept all the time. But Master Bong Su-han, by the way, this book is by Joe Himes, who's one of Bruce Lee's students, and he's got several different martial arts teachers that he talks about in this book. But this is one of his teachers. Master Bong Su-han is a Korean of medium height with a full head of iron gray hair. There's a quiet authority in everything he says and does. No movement or word is superfluous. He is the traditional martial artist who learned Hapkido from his master in Korea, who in turn learned it from a master who had been taught by a long, continuous line of other masters. A session with Master Han is not just a workout. A session with it is also a lesson in life. I always feel enriched after leaving his dojo. I was 50 years old when I started the study of Hapkido with Master Han. From the beginning, the learning process was slow and often difficult for me because Hapkido requires an extremely limber body. So some of you who have been practicing martial arts for a little bit might be feeling a little bit sympathetic to this author. Even if you're not 50 years old, you probably feel something that you wish were a little bit more limber. So my body had stiffened with age and I had back problems that threw me off balance and made every kick above waist level painful. My learning was further complicated by the presence of much younger men who were able to do easily that which required tremendous effort and concentration on my part. This is also probably bringing some painful memories back to mind for some of you guys when you first started martial arts. Everybody's better than me. There were many times where I considered quitting, a fact Master Han recognized. One afternoon, following a workout, Master Han invited me to have tea with him. After he had served the tea, he began. You will never learn to do any endeavor properly unless you are willing to give yourself time. I think you are accustomed to having everything come easily to you, but this is not the way of life or of the martial arts. I'm patient, I said. We're not talking now about patience, he answered. To be patient is to have the capacity of calm endurance. To give yourself time is to actively work towards a goal without setting a limit on how long you will work. And you guys see the difference there. To actively work without giving yourself a time limit. This is like when my teacher, Stephen Brown, had to add the second way of perseverance because he had the first way of becoming patient, and one of his students would show up like once every couple of weeks or once every couple of months, and he would reassure Stephen Brown, I'm good, Cecil, I'm patient. If it takes me 30 years, I'll get it someday. And he said, no, you're still going to suck in 30 years because you don't come often enough. You got to build up, have the consistency in your practice while still being patient. Both of those things are important. So the author goes on to say, he had touched the core of my problem. I had given myself a set amount of time to become reasonably proficient in his style, and I was frustrating myself because I didn't seem to be achieving the goal quickly enough. When I eliminated the deadline from my mind, it was like removing a weight from my body. Within a few months, I was able to perform with the rest of the class. Equally important, I used Master Han's advice to resolve an immediate problem. I was working on a book at that time, and the writing was going slowly. Maybe it was this book, I don't know. That frustrated me because I had agreed to start another project in short order and it was weighing on my mind. Now I could see that my focus was wrong. I was doing the same thing I had done with Hot Keto. I should have been concerned with the process of working on the book rather than on its completion. Once I removed the time constraint from my mind and approached the book without an arbitrary limit, I was able to dedicate myself to the writing and work without anxiety. This concept of focusing on the process and focusing on the actions rather than on the deadline is so incredibly important in all things in life. Again, anything especially that is going to take some real time, it is so important. If we can learn to focus on the process rather than on the product, this is what we mean by effortless effort or striving without striving. When we create goals, and part of the timing for this talk is for all of you guys who have made goals and have probably at this point hit your first roadblock or your first many roadblocks along the way to achieving your goals. You set out to do this thing and you had an idea in your mind of how long it was going to take you or how quickly it would go, and then you run into something and you say, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this. It's going to take me longer than I thought. I don't have the time. I don't have the energy, whatever. But if you can focus on the process and focus on the actions, then this is going to take you all the way until its completion, whatever that looks like, however long it takes, right? So that is the very important step of forming habits is to make it something that you can focus on the action of, right? That is what a habit is essentially, is an action. Even if it is just a thought, right? We have habitual thoughts and we want to be able to focus on the habit of those thoughts and continue to do those, have those thoughts or continue to do those actions. And that without the arbitrary deadline of however long we think it's supposed to take us to accomplish something, that is the key to success. One of my favorite, I was going to talk about this later, but let's talk about it now. One of my favorite, actually, I will talk about it later because it's a good thing to finish with before we meditate. Okay, habit of ego consciousness. Great. The next thing I want to talk about is another kind of example of this, which is from a different book. This is from Budo Secrets. It's another great book, and you should read it. This was pointed out by one of the students earlier today. And I really like you get a very clear visual, a mental image of how habits work. So Teshu would tell his disciples, Teshu is a martial artist. He said, when someone comes to the dojo for a challenge match, take a look at the bottom of his wooden sandals in the entrance hall while he is changing clothes in the hall. It's very sneaky advice. If the teeth on the bottom of the sandals are not worn evenly, you can be sure he is often off balance and not much of a swordsman. So this is interesting, and it doesn't tie in perfectly with the idea of habits, but enough that you guys can get where I'm going with this. You look at the traditional Japanese sandal, and it's got like these essentially teeth sticking out of the bottom. And if you see that they're like uneven, it's kind of like if you walk kind of funny and you look at the bottom of your shoe, it's all like askew like this. And you know that you're walking funny, both from the pain of just walking, but also from looking at your shoe. You know that you're doing something wrong. And the point, Teshu's point here is that you can see that, and you can tell that this off-balance nature is proof, or it's a sign that this is not a great martial artist. Now, how you take that into the challenge match, and if you go into it thinking like I'm going to easily beat this person or not, I'm not going to get into that part of it. What I'm going to get into is the very interesting reality, which is our actions become habit, and then that has a physical effect on our lives and on our being. And I mean, the way that you habitually move will actually change the physical structure of your body. And you will notice that if you walk in a certain way, things are painful, and your body will start to contort itself to deal with that pain, to try to lessen the pain. And then all of a sudden you are off, you are contorting, right? And you can see that in your sandals, but you can see it in your physicality. And in maybe more subtle ways, you can see it even in the physicality of your world that you have built. We are all spending a lot of extra time at home in our little kingdoms now. And of course, a lot of you are sharing that space with other people, but at the end of the day, there is a part of that space that you have to take responsibility for and recognize that if it's always messy, that is you, that is your habits. And if it's something that you can physically see, you're lucky, because those are the easy ones to notice, and those are the easy ones to be reminded about, to rectify. It's all the more subtle ones that are more difficult. So this is why meditation is so important, because we're not always going to see the way that the pattern is wearing down on us from the outside. Something that you have to, be connecting to and introspecting upon on a regular basis. So these habits that we create are incredibly important. In martial arts, we have this concept called mushin, which is no mind. And I talk about the idea of somebody attacking you, and if you're in this state of no mind, you're able to respond without thinking. There's no ego there. There's no logical brain there, which is incredibly important, because that takes too much time. You don't have the time to think about what your response is going to be. You have to just be able to respond immediately. Now, if your technique is off, that's like having your uneven teeth on your sandals, and you got to respond, and you're going to be tripping over yourself. If your technique is flawless because you have created these habits of technique that is so good that you don't even know how to do it incorrectly anymore, your technique is automatically there and as perfect as possible, then when you are in this state of no mind and you're just responding, your technique will be there, and it will be as flawless as it can be without anything in the way. You're going to respond instantly. In Zen, the martial arts, he talks about with one of his teachers called this sparking. So if you're in no mind and the opportunity arises, and then you spark, and it just comes from you naturally. You are not creating the spark. It's like it's flowing through you. So in martial arts, we see this very clearly. If you're sparring or you're grappling, if you have the technique solidly from all of your practice, then it will flow through you naturally. And this is going to happen in everyday life. Our habits are going to flow through us naturally at some point without us having to think about it. You don't have to think about the way that we walk. You don't have to think about the way that we breathe, although you should think about the way that you breathe and fix it. But you get the idea. There's another chunk here. This is the last reading that I'm going to give today, and we're running kind of low on time here, but this is also from Budo Secrets. And this is from, wait a minute, I'm on the wrong page. So this is about, this first part is from Gojin Miyagi. And Miyagi was the founder of Goju-Ryu. So he had many students, but he would not give any of them Dan rankings. The Dan is the black belt ranking in Japanese martial arts. So first Dan is first degree black belt, second Dan is second degree black belt. And they use that in other things like in Go and other things, but in martial arts, that's the common word for it. So even though such a ranking system had been adopted by almost every other martial art, Miyagi felt that ranking systems create artificial levels of attainment. People get judged for their rank, not for their character. So Miyagi instructed his students to keep the fact that they practice karate a secret, in distinct contrast to students of other dojo who boasted of their dan ranks. So this is very interesting, because we have a tendency to be looking for this external validation, right? And if you are beginning with the goal in mind, or the idea that I have to get to my black sash or my black belt, and of course you have a certain amount of time that you're giving yourself for that, you're going to be in real trouble in this style of martial art, because the vast majority of people never get to black belt or black sash. There have been, my teacher has had, I don't know how many, probably 20,000 students by this time, maybe more. And there are only, I think 9 of us, maybe 10 by now, black sashes. That is the odds are not great. And for me, we've had over 1,000 students now and 0 black sashes. But we're heading in the direction we should have the first couple of black sashes testing it at some point soon. But they are only still here practicing because they got the idea of getting to black sash out of their heads right away. Otherwise, they would have quit very early on, thinking of how long it's going to take and you know all the effort and everything that goes into it. You got to focus on the process rather than the product. So the idea of getting beyond that thing that you're trying to attain and just focusing on this technique, that is how you eventually add up to these great habits and you add up to being a black sash. There's another chunk down here, which was from Toyama Sensei. He told his students, secret techniques begin with basic techniques. Basic techniques end as secret techniques. There are no secrets at the beginning, but there are secrets at the end. Key to success is hard training. We love to think of, it's the same kind of thing as like, I got to get to the next sash. I got to get to the next technique. I want to learn that fancy, advanced technique. And we all kind of get caught up in, as Steve Brown says, the flash and the trash, like the new, exciting, shiny thing. What's that? Oh, I got to do that. Oh, what's this? I got to do that. I was talking about this earlier today in Tai Chi about the importance of being able to choose our thing and focus on it. Right? So starting habits or accomplishing anything huge in life is on some level about having the focus to follow through. You decide what your priorities are, you set aside the time and energy to do it, and you focus on that thing until it's done. Now, practically speaking, of course, there will be many things that you cannot just get done before moving on to something else, right? You're going to have to, even as you're practicing martial arts, you're going to have to, do your job and eat food and whatever else. But you've got to have this, the wherewithal to set your priority and focus on it without constantly being pulled in different directions, right? If your experience of life or forming habits is like, I do this for a little bit and then, I get distracted. And then I do this for a little bit. I get distracted from that. And I do this a little bit. You're not going to feel the building success, that compounding kind of interest of effort, daily practice, and how that builds on itself. So allow yourself to really dive deeply into something, to set that priority and work that habit until it is really a habit, until it's solid and you know that it's there, and then move on to the next thing. So the last thing that I'll talk about is this. This is one of my favorite things that I've ever heard about ego consciousness and habit. And it is a super simple concept if you get what habits are, essentially just a thing that you're doing over and over and over again. And it's a thing that has become automatic for you, whether you did it on purpose or not. This is just an automatic thing. And if you understand what I mean by ego consciousness, so ego consciousness is like the small self. It is the part of you that sees yourself as being separate from everybody else. And it's the part of you that has, that really gets wrapped up in the emotion of like, I'm not getting this as quickly as I want to. In this case, I'm talking about your ego consciousness really as the way that you are identifying the thing that you are identifying as, or the way that you are experiencing life as your small self, your self that is really at the whim of everything and everyone else, the self that has very little power. The ego is always like basically whining. It's that voice in the back of your head that always wishes that things were better, and always wishes that like, you could catch a break and all of that. That's the ego. And the ego also does other things that are not as bad. But the ego, identifying as the small self, identifying as ego consciousness, is on some level a habit. And when you realize that this habit, like all other habits, can be broken and or can be transformed into other habits, that is a super powerful, incredibly important realization to have. Because When you look at this idea of enlightenment, you think of it as this far off thing that maybe someday I will achieve this if I'm lucky, through some miracle. I'll be able to transcend the small self and really be, one with everything, really have that experience, attain that enlightenment. It's always like that far off thing, right? And of course, forming a habit and doing something that is as serious of an undertaking or as vast as achieving enlightenment is absolutely something that you got to give yourself time for. So it is in some way a far off goal, but it is an actionable goal. It is not something that is just totally up in the air luck. I hope it happens someday. You should think of it as like, it'll be really nice if that happens for me. It'll be really nice if I have that meditation that is so, solid and beautiful and perfect that I leave the meditation transformed as a different person. But you also want to take the actions that will lead you to that experience and creating the habit of identifying as the bigger self, as the, this is the experience of oneness, is identifying as part of the universe, or as identifying as whole of the universe. This is a habit that you can create through meditation, through reprogramming the types of thoughts that you have, and by programming in your consciousness a habit of returning back to the breath, returning back to the best that you can achieve today as far as identifying as the bigger self and letting the ego go. If your thought patterns are constantly going back to the thoughts of separateness, if your thought patterns are constantly wrapped up in judgments and all of the other things that the ego does, you don't have to wait to work on that until you have fully achieved enlightenment, because it might never happen for you that way. You need to start chipping away at those habitual thoughts and at the big habit of identifying as the small self. That is a habitual thought pattern. It's a habitual state of being, is identifying as the ego. So meditation helps us to free ourselves from that and starting to replace that way of being or those habitual thoughts with a different one, with the habitual experience of this very full self, right? When you are focusing on the breath, you allow yourself to be filled with it in that moment, you are transcending the ego. And the more you can come back to that, the less you are feeding into this habit of ego identification, the more you're feeding into the habit of identifying as the soul, the Atman, the Buddha nature, that which is much bigger than you, and that which is everything, right? Universal identification is really what we're after. It's no small task. So let's start working on that tonight with your meditation. And every breath that you come back to is on some level reprogramming your mind and creating a new habit where you're letting go of the old habit of ego identification and building the new habit of identifying as that soul, or identifying as that spark of the divine, that piece of the universe. So sit comfortably.